Hello and welcome to the Mr. Brown podcast, where I reflect on my journey as an early career teacher, with a special focus on mental health. I am your host, James Brown. Salutations. I hope this finds you all well. I have 3 things to discuss today. I've mentioned before on the podcast a few times now that in the fast-paced hustle and bustle of day-to-day teaching, it can be very easy to lose track of your own journey, and in particular, to lose track of how far you've come. Every so often, however, it gets hammered home, and it was hammered home for me in the past couple of weeks. Now, one nice way to keep track of your progress is to take on a trainee, and I've been lucky to have a trainee this year. It was only a couple of years ago when I was a trainee myself, and so I'm regularly reminded of how far I've come since then. And last week, I almost felt like I'd come full circle. I remember during my training year, I was teaching a lesson on how to find the surface area of a cuboid to a Year 10 class, and I took some shortcuts, which to me were perfectly obvious. However, these shortcuts were completely lost on the students, and they hadn't got a clue what I was doing. So at that time, I was very much labouring under the curse of knowledge. The curse of knowledge is something that you learn to shed in your training year, if things go to plan. And you learn to put yourself back in the shoes of someone who doesn't know anything about whatever it is you're talking about. But at that time, I was labouring under the curse of knowledge, took some shortcuts that were completely lost on my students. They all got confused, and my mentor was at the back of the room shaking his head. And we spoke about it later on, and he explained all this to me. With that particular sort of question, you have to make every single step explicit and keep very good track of everything you're working out so that you can add everything up together at the end. And I'd glossed over all of that. So he set me straight. That was a couple of years ago when I was a trainee. A week or so ago, however, I'm now the mentor. My trainee was teaching a lesson on how to find the surface area of a cuboid to a Year 9 class. And she took exactly the same shortcut that I did a couple of years ago. And it was met by the students with exactly the same sort of confusion. And so it was me this time who corrected the mistake. And we had a good conversation about it afterwards, in much the same way that I had a good conversation about it with my mentor a couple of years ago. So what's the moral of the story? I don't really know. Well, I guess part of the moral of the story is that it's important, as I've said before, to make time to reflect on how well you're doing and how far you've come, especially in the first few years of teaching. And I think it also highlights the real value of the mentor-trainee relationship. So if you have the opportunity to be a mentor, it's well worth doing. It really is. The second thing I'd like to discuss today. I was asked to do something recently. Well, not that recently. It's something that I had to make sure I got done this year with my Year 11 class. It was to make sure that they sat and passed their entry-level exams. And it ended up being a bit of a mess. And that's for several reasons. But that's kind of not the main point of what I want to discuss here. The point is, I was expected to get this thing done. I didn't entirely understand what it was I needed to do. And I certainly didn't get the result that I wanted, And the experience left me feeling a little bit incompetent and dejected and negative. I mean, that particular story about the entry level will have a happy ending. It's going to be sorted. But still, it didn't go to plan. And like I said, I felt a bit incompetent. It wasn't a pleasant experience, let's put it that way. And it got me thinking. I think that how I felt must be similar, if not the same, to the way in which students feel when we ask them to do something that they don't entirely understand. So if our explanations haven't been clear enough, or our expectations explicit enough, and the student can't complete the task they're being asked to do, or behave in the way which is expected, then they're going to feel pretty rubbish about themselves, which is exactly the way I felt. And this, for lots of students, must be what it's like day in, day out at school. Now, even at the best of schools, with the best of teachers who deliver the clearest of explanations, ultimately, the student experience is arriving at a building every day and being asked to confront over and over and over the limits of your own knowledge, being pushed past them again and again and again. Just when you think you know something or you understand something, you're shoved further out into the unknown and confronted with something which, again, you don't understand, and asked to figure it out, expected to figure it out. You may even get in trouble if you don't figure it out. And when you think about it like that, students are absolutely amazing. Because I had this one experience recently where I was confronted with the unknown and I didn't handle it in the best possible way. Things didn't quite turn out as I would have liked, and it made me feel a bit rubbish. Well, that's what students have to do each and every day. And no wonder some of them may struggle with their mental health. I think I would as well. I don't know how I got through it. I think it's something that's important to bear in mind with students, that the unknown makes us uncomfortable. It can be anxiety-inducing. And as adults, we typically operate within our comfort zone. However, with students, we're constantly pushing the boundaries of their comfort zone into the growth zone and beyond, perhaps even into chaos. And that's happening for them each and every day, and they are absolutely amazing. I know some of my students listen to this podcast. So if you're listening now, Mr. Brown thinks you are amazing. And it's not only an intellectual feat to be pushed out into the unknown and acquire new knowledge each and every day, it's also a moral feat. It takes a great deal of courage. If you're a student, you are amazing and you are very brave. You're doing a fantastic job. Keep doing what you're doing. You're my inspiration. Now, finally, speaking of students, I wanted to discuss the way in which I use the word proud and how my use of the word proud has changed over time. About 18 months ago, when marking books, I would regularly write on books, "You should be very proud of this work." Something along those lines. You should be very proud of yourself. You should be very proud of your work. And then I remember a year 8 girl, I'll never forget this. I'd given them a moment to flick back in their book and have a read of the feedback that I'd left them. And she was one of these students for whom I'd written, "You should be very proud of this result or of this work." She put her hand up and said, "Sir, you've written here that I should be very proud of my work. But what about you? Are you proud of my work?" And I said, "Of course I am. Of course I'm proud." And that meant a lot to that student. And that kind of gave me a bit of a breakthrough, because I don't know why, but early on as a teacher, a couple of years ago, I felt uncomfortable saying that I was proud of students' work. It felt more comfortable to say that you should be proud of your work or you should be proud of yourself, but it just felt a little bit awkward or uncomfortable for me to say I am proud of your work. But that was a breakthrough moment. That student, that girl saying that to me in that Year 8 class, almost gave me license or permission to tell students that I was proud of their work. So that was the first change in the way in which I use the word proud. In the past year, I would say, I've gradually made another change. Because there were occasions when students, for whatever reason, hadn't produced the best work or hadn't got the best result in their most recent test. But I was proud of them nonetheless. I was proud of them for the way in which they work in lessons, for their attitude, for their character, for the sort of friend that they seem to be to other students. I was proud of them for lots of reasons. The work that they produced, or their results in tests, was just one aspect, maybe even a trivial aspect in the grand scheme of things. So, I started off a few years ago saying, you should be proud of this work. Thanks to that girl's intervention, I moved on to saying, I am proud of this work. And then recently, in the past year or so, it's changed to simply, I am proud of you. It's not always about the work. I don't want students to think that if they stop doing good work or if they get a bad result in a test, that I would no longer be proud of them. I now write, I am proud of you. But the thought of writing that a couple of years ago would have made me really uncomfortable, and I don't really know what's changed between now and then. I think part of the answer might be that I've developed some really meaningful relationships with my students, and I think I now feel that me saying that I am proud of them actually means something to them. Perhaps at the start, when I was a new teacher in a new school and I didn't know students very well, saying I am proud of you, I'd have felt awkward saying it because I wouldn't have known that students would have cared. You know, I was new. What do they care if I'm proud of them? They might not even know my name at that point. But over the course of a few years, I've built some really meaningful relationships, and now I can say sincerely and authentically to my students that I am proud of them, and I'm also confident in the fact that that is meaningful for my students. So there you go, a little history of the way in which my use of the word proud has changed over the past couple of years. How do you use the word proud? And indeed, please let me know your thoughts on anything else I've said in this episode. I'm always very happy to hear them. Oh, I almost forgot to do my Patreon plea. I normally do it mid-episode, but I'll do it now instead. This episode took a couple of hours to produce, which is about average, and I aim to produce a couple of episodes a month. So if you think that work is worth at least the price of a coffee, that's £2 to £3 once a month, then please consider signing up on Patreon and helping me cover the cost of producing the podcast. It doesn't cost a lot, but any contribution would be greatly appreciated. And if you sign up on Patreon, you will also have exclusive early access to videos of my recording sessions. As always, I'll leave a link below in the show notes. Talk again soon. If you enjoyed this episode, please spread the word in person and on social media. You can follow me on Twitter at MrBrownPod or email mrbrownpod@gmail.com. Please subscribe, rate and review in your directory of choice. Please also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/MrBrownPod and helping me cover the cost of producing the podcast. Thank you, and talk again soon.